Today, you will listen to find out why President Lincoln is remembered as a courageous president. What is happening in this picture? Gather in closer, closer, everyone, the soldier cried out. The people gathered beneath a massive or very large oak tree. It was a bitter cold day in January 1863. A boy named Samuel, age 10, and his sister Violet, age 7, squeezed and prodded their way through the crowd. Let's keep going to the front, Samuel said, tugging Violet's hand. No, let's stay here in the middle where it's warm, said Violet, thankful to have so many bodies pressed close around her to shield her from the freezing January wind. Fine, you stay here, but I'm going up front so I can hear, said Samuel. You don't even know what he's going to talk about, Violet said, as her brother wormed his way toward the tree. Finally, Violet gave in and followed her brother to the very front. There, a Union soldier wearing a long, heavy blue coat held a scroll, a rolled up piece of paper, which was sealed with a red wax stamp. What is it? Some kind of news? Asked a woman in the crowd. What happened? What's on that piece of paper? Asked another. Honestly, I do not know, the soldier answered. My commander handed me this scroll and ordered me to come up to this tree and read it. So that is what I'm going to do. What do you think the scroll will say? The tree where the people were gathering was in a place called Hampton, Virginia. Hampton was different than other places in Virginia, mainly because nearby Fort Monroe was still under control of the Union. Unlike Fort Sumter and so many other forts controlled by the Confederates, the Union still held Fort Monroe. So the Union soldiers also controlled the nearby port and town. During the war, many escaped slaves had come to Fort Monroe, hoping to be safe from slave catchers. Eventually, a community of free African Americans had sprung up around the town of Hampton, and that is why on this day in 1863, a large group of free African Americans were gathering under the giant oak tree in Virginia to listen to a Union soldier. So, how is this part of Virginia different from other parts of Virginia and other Confederate states? Samuel and Violet had been born into slavery, but their parents had managed to escape at the beginning of the war, and they had been living in Hampton ever since. Quiet, the soldier called. Quiet, please. When everyone was settled, the soldier read the first words. By the President of the United States of America, a proclamation. So this is an official announcement from President Lincoln. The soldier waited a moment. Everyone knew right away that they were about to hear something very important. It was not every day that the president sent out written proclamations. The soldier continued reading. Whereas on the 22nd day of September, in the year of our Lord, 1862, a proclamation was issued by the President of the United States containing, among other things, the following to wit. What did he just say? Violet asked eagerly, tugging on Samuel's sleeve. I'm not really sure, he replied. It was just a fancy way of saying the date, I think. The date was September 22nd, 1862. Now hush and listen. The soldier read some more. That on the first day of January, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state shall thenceforward and forever free. The crowd erupted in gasps of relief and joy. Read that again, someone shouted, interrupting the soldier. I want to make sure I heard you right. Everyone in the crowd had been enslaved at one time. So they were very happy to hear that President Lincoln was proclaiming an end to slavery. Samuel and Violet listened to the rest of it, But when it was over, Violet did not really understand most of what she had heard. So, does this mean that we don't have to worry about being captured by the slave catchers anymore? She asked Samuel. I think so, Samuel answered, rubbing his chin. I think President Lincoln said all slaves are now free, but I'm not really sure. We'll have to ask Mother what it all means. The document the soldier read was called the Emancipation Proclamation. Emancipation is an act of setting something or someone free. What is a proclamation? It is one of the most famous documents in the history of the United States, but it did not do exactly what you might think, at least not right away. Unfortunately, President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation did not automatically free all the enslaved people. In fact, it did not even say that all slaves should be free, only that enslaved people in the states that were still fighting against the Union should be free. What was the group of states fighting against the Union called? Some states, including Maryland and Delaware, still had slavery, but they had not seceded from the Union. So, were Maryland and Delaware still part of the Union? Lincoln allowed people in states that had not seceded to keep their slaves as long as they continued to fight on the side of the Union. Eventually, slavery was abolished or ended by law in all these states, but not just because of the Emancipation Proclamation. Look at this map. The gray colored states were members of the Confederacy. The green colored states were slave-holding states that were in the Union, and they were not affected by the Emancipation Proclamation. Slavery was a major reason that the nation was divided in the first place, but the reason President Lincoln declared war was that the Confederacy broke national law by seceding from the Union. In other words, in the beginning, the war was not about ending slavery, but about keeping the nation whole. The Emancipation Proclamation changed this. The Emancipation Proclamation changed the focus and the purpose of the war at a time when things were not going well for the Union. This was before the Battle of Gettysburg, which took place in July 1863. The Union had not won many battles. Yet, tens of thousands of men were already dead or wounded, and there was no end in sight to the war. So, what did the Emancipation Proclamation do and not do? It changed the war, but it didn't end the war. Many people, including his closest advisors, told President Lincoln to end the war and let the Confederacy have its way. This picture shows Lincoln just having read the Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet or group of advisors. Some thought it was a good idea, and some did not. But President Lincoln did what he knew was the right thing to do. The Emancipation Proclamation let everyone know that President Lincoln was not only determined to preserve or save the Union, he also wanted to make sure that slavery would never cause another war. This made the abolitionists very happy, and after that, they put their full support behind President Lincoln and the war. Who were the abolitionists? The Emancipation Proclamation also allowed free African Americans and escaped slaves to fight for the Union. The famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass helped recruit African Americans. This means that he encouraged them to join the Union Army as soldiers. Many African Americans did join the Union Army and fought courageously. African American men and women were eager to help the Union Army in other ways too. Men worked as carpenters, cooks, guards, laborers, and boat pilots. African American women were devoted nurses, spies, and scouts. In this way, men and women who had never been enslaved, as well as former enslaved Africans, courageously worked together to save the Union and bring freedom to the slaves in the South. This statue, the Spirit of Freedom Today, stands at the African American Civil War Memorial in Washington, D.C., to honor the more than 200,000 African American soldiers who served the United States during the Civil War. From that day forward, the great oak tree in Hampton, Virginia, became known as the Emancipation Oak. It was the first place the Emancipation Proclamation was read on Confederate territory. After the Emancipation Proclamation, the Union Army freed enslaved people each time it won a battle and took control of a town or some farmland in a southern state. Little by little, one plantation at a time, slavery in the United States was finally coming to an end.